Welcome to the next lesson in our module on Android broadcast receivers. This lesson focuses on Android broadcast receiver security. There are several learning objectives in this lesson. After completing this lesson, you'll understand key security issues of Android broadcast receivers, and you'll also recognize how the Android Local Broadcast Manager helps to address some of these issues. We'll start by describing some of the security issues associated with Android broadcast receivers. The broadcasting of intents in general raises a variety of security issues. And these issues stem largely from one of the benefits of the Android intents model. That is, its ability to be able to connect together loosely coupled components. But of course, with that flexibility also comes some potential security risks, which we'll talk about here. One of the problems is that the intent namespace is global. As a result, it's possible for there to be conflicts where different apps or different app components will have the same names, and the Android system won't be able to disambiguate them. This can lead to various subtle namespace conflicts, where multiple components will be named with the same actions and therefore be ambiguous to the underlying Android Activity Manager service and its intent resolution process. For example, you can imagine a problem that would occur if you gave a name to an action name to a receiver that used the Android namespace, which is android.intent.action. Of course, what we want to say here is something related to our MOOC or our particular application as a way to bound it, our domain, for example. So it's important to follow namespace conventions and not steal the namespaces of the Android namespace or some other namespace. Another problem is that any app can send an intent to any receiver that's registered dynamically by the register receiver call. The problem here, quite frankly, is that the model is too open, too loosely defined, too free. One way to handle this is to use permissions to control who can send and receive intents. For example, when we do a send broadcast, we can give a permission, which is a string, that can be used to match up with only those receivers that register with the same permission. So this is a way of trying to restrict the scope via the permissions mechanism to ensure that senders and receivers are correctly connected together and not anyone can register for any intent. There's a similar problem that occurs where any app can send intents to a receiver that's published or registered statically by the Android manifest.xml file. So once again, anybody who uses these files can receive an intent that's pushed out. To prevent this, make the receiver unavailable by setting the Android export flag to false, which means that this particular receiver will not be exposed to anyone except other components that are part of the same app. Yet another problem is that send broadcast and the family of send broadcast related methods, such as sending sticky broadcasts or order broadcasts and so on, allow any other app to receive broadcast intents. So they're by nature very promiscuous. They go to everybody across the system. That's the very nature of the system nature of intents. One way to handle this is to use the set package method on an intent, which can be used to restrict broadcasts to a single app or to components within a single app. For example, our Pong receiver, which we looked at in the previous lesson, the example there, uses set package when it creates an intent for action view Pong so that it will only be resolvable by components that are part of this ping pong receiver app. Let's now talk a bit about how the Android Local Broadcast Manager works. The Local Broadcast Manager class can be used to overcome some of Android's security issues that we just discussed. Local Broadcast Manager actually occupies a special place in the Android hierarchy. It's not part of the baseline source code. Instead, it's part of the so-called support libraries. and that's intended to provide backward compatibility across earlier releases. The idea behind the local broadcast manager is to very strictly limit the scope of intents that are broadcast to only go to broadcast receivers that are part of the app. And as we'll see in a moment, even more narrowly to part of the process that the app is running in. This helps with security issues, of course, because other apps can't send or receive these broadcast intents. It's only going to go to the components that are part of, and the broadcast receivers, more specifically, that are part of an app where the local broadcast manager is used. Moreover, this approach works only within the same process, which again limits the scope, but also has the side effect that it makes the intent broadcast mechanism much more efficient since intents do not cross process boundaries. In particular, the activity manager service is not used, and instead, a local broadcast manager instance is used. And if you take a look at the source code that's available online in various places, you'll see it basically works by using an array list of receivers, which it then sends out at very particular times to be efficient. In fact, you can take a look here and find the source code for local broadcast manager if you're curious how its implementation behaves. This is the end of the lesson on Android broadcast receiver security.